Hello, we are the Pro Environmental Behaviors Group. My name is Jalen, and the other people in my group are Tristan, Megan, Sabrina, and Garrett. For our project, our group chose with the topic of fast fashion. Fast fashion is clothing that is usually mass produced and most times made in factories overseas. They're usually viewed as careless or reckless when it comes to their choices regarding the environment, definitely, especially in terms of air pollution and water regulations. A couple examples of these companies are H&M and Forever 21. So to start off with, we conducted some in-depth one-on-one interviews to get some qualitative research. Some topics that were brought up in about almost all the interviews was a lot of people saw a lot of fast fashion on social media, and another reason that came up is a lot of people chose fast fashion because the difference in price in comparison to clothing from a company, a sustainable brand company. So after getting this information, we came up with a research survey to get some descriptive data. And then after collecting responses from our survey and getting the descriptive data, we came up with 6 testable hypotheses to help us analyze the data and come up with conclusions to see if it compared with our qualitative research. Our 6 hypotheses are: most consumers think that sustainable fashion is more expensive. Women are more likely to shop sustainably for their clothes than men. The general public is unaware of the effect of fast fashion has on the environment. Social media affects consumers' purchasing behaviors. Women's fashion trends change more than men's fashion trends. Consumers assume that the quality of fast fashion is generally low.
Hi, I'm Megan Kaiser, and I will be discussing the methodology part of our environmental behavior research project. We decided to use survey research as a group because it made the most sense for the research that we were trying to obtain. With the information that we gained by surveying people about their knowledge of the fast fashion and slow fashion industry, we were able to draw on a number of conclusions that will be presented in our analysis. Survey research was optimal for our group since we were asking the participants questions regarding their behaviors, intentions, and attitudes towards the fast fashion and the slow fashion industry. Our group researched how various individuals perceived the slow fashion, and fast fashion in their everyday lives. We sent this survey out using Qualtrics to 64 different participants that responded. These participants included family, friends, and coworkers. During our research, we only had to screen out one participant due to them not completing the survey to the full capacity that it was needed.
Hello, my name is Garrett, and I'll be going over the infographic that we created. This shows, first off, how many consumers are aware of sustainable fashion, and roughly 47% were aware that sustainable fashion exists, and this includes fashion brands like Patagonia, Reformation, and Hoka. And then the second point is our social media and how it influences the buying habits in clothing. So overall, we found that there was a correlation between social media and how people choose to buy certain products. And then lastly, we studied um, how people know or are aware of the environmental impacts of fast fashion. And most consumers are unaware of fast fashion and its impacts on the environment. So, and in total, we surveyed 63 participants, and it was just to seek the public knowledge about the fashion industry. So, this is just to kind of give an at glance view of our presentation. Next slide. We have our first hypothesis was most consumers think that sustainable fashion is more expensive. And for this hypothesis, we we made the null hypothesis of consumers on average probably think sustainable fashion is more expensive than fast fashion. And this is mu is less than or equal to 2. Our alternative hypothesis was consumers on average at least probably think that sustainable fashion is more expensive, making that mu is greater than 2. From there, we decided to conduct a one sample t-test because we're trying to find how each participant views one question. And with the way we phrased our hypotheses, we found it to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Since it's a one-tailed t-test, we found that the one-tailed p-value is 0.1411 and the mean of the data to be 1.857. With our hypothesized mean of 2, we found that the data and our hypothesis are very similar. Also, since the p-value is greater than 0.05, which means we're working at a 95% rating, we do not reject the null hypothesis. This means that consumers generally think the fast fashion is less expensive than sustainable fashion. And then for our next hypothesis, which was women are more likely to shop sustainably for their clothing than men, we decided to make the null hypothesis. Women are equally likely to shop sustainably for their clothes than men. And the alternative, women are not equally likely to shop sustainably for their clothes than men. This way we can test, what we are testing is once again mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive with the way that we phrased our hypotheses. And then we went ahead and ran an independent sample t-test with 2 tails this time to test the relationship between men and women in sustainable fashion. After running the test, we found that the variances are different. The variance of males is 0.4958, and the variance for females was 0.3784. We also found that the p-value was 0.2349, which is greater than 0.05. Therefore, we cannot reject the null hypothesis, and we take the alternative hypothesis. This means that men and women are equally likely to shop sustainably for their clothes.
Our next hypothesis was the general public is unaware of the effects of fast fashion on the environment. From here, we made our null hypothesis. Consumers on average, probably yes, are aware of the effects of fast fashion on the environment, which means our alternative hypothesis was consumers on average at least probably are aware of the effects of fast fashion on the environment. We performed a one sample t-test because we are trying to find how each participant views one question. We made our hypotheses mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Since we performed a one-tailed test, we find that our p-value is 1.8 e to the 25, and the mean of the data came out to be 2.7. With the p-value being less than 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis, and this means that consumers on average are unaware of the effects of fast fashion on the environment.
I will be discussing our 4th hypothesis. Our 4th hypothesis was social media affects consumers' purchasing behaviors. Our null hypothesis that was concluded was social media does not affect consumers' purchasing behaviors. The alternative hypothesis was social media does affect consumers' purchasing behaviors. We made our hypothesis mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. We conducted a 2-sample test assuming unequal variances. This test was conducted due to the hypothesis asking the participants one question regarding how social media affects their purchasing behaviors. The p-value of this test was 0.0099 and the mean was 2.22. The p-value was less than 0.05, so we reject the null hypothesis. Therefore, consumers think that social media does have an effect on consumers' purchasing behaviors regarding fast fashion and more sustainable fashion options.
For the hypothesis that I did the analysis for, it was women's fashion trends change more than men's trends. So for the testing, what I did initially was I took all of the data and I split it between men and women. And then I took their responses and I found the variance for both of them. I wanted to make sure that they were unequal variances. I assumed they would be, but I wanted to make sure before I ran a test. And so the women's variance was higher than the men's, mostly because we did have more of a sample from women. And so I ran a t-test to sample assuming unequal variances. And initially when I looked at it, I saw the P1 tail to be 4.53. And so I thought that it was a lot different than what I was assuming because we were going with a 95% confidence rate, which would be 0.05. So then I looked and I saw that it was e to the negative 0.05. And then I realized that it was actually a very small number. So then that, first of all, proved that our hypothesis was true, that women's fashion trends do change more than men's trends. And then I also just wanted to double check my work. So what I did is I looked at the difference in means between women and men. And I noticed that the women's mean was 3.43 and the men's was 2.06. So this means that women rated that their trends changed more than men rated that their trends changed.
For our final analysis, our null hypothesis is consumers don't assume the quality is low or a mean score of less than or equal to 3. The alternative hypothesis is consumers do assume the quality of fast fashion is low or a mean score of greater than 3. Running the test, we got a mean score of 3.14, which is greater than 3, but since the p-value is 0.08078, which is greater than the significance value 0.05, we failed to reject the null hypothesis. So we come to the conclusions consumers don't assume that the quality of fast fashion is low.
For our conclusion, our first point would be that there are some weaknesses. Our biggest weaknesses would be within chances of bias. Our first one and probably most prevalent would be that we mostly have our data from our direct network. Almost everyone that responded would be people we know directly, and this can definitely cause bias because we are all pro-environment and anti-fast fashion, which this means that most of the people we associate ourselves probably at least have a little bit of a similar view. Maybe not all of them, but a lot probably do, so that can definitely skew our data. And also, there was maybe some question leading. We did, for the most part, really try to keep them very unbiased, but some of our questions could have been leading, especially if they, piggybacked off of another question. And then Tristan's going to take over for the rest of the conclusion.
So portions to strengthen, we needed to have a little bit more balance between genders. We just sent it out to all of the people that we knew, and there wasn't a real balance between how many males and how many females answered. So if we were to do it again, we would try to balance that number a little bit better. But at the end of the day, we feel we did our calculations correctly, and there's no reason for us to doubt our data or our analysis.